So in this talk, I'd like to address one of my pieces, Symphony of Noise VR, and theoretically analyze the creation of it. So I will basically talk about suspension of disbelief and alienation effect as forms of building an emotional journey and a user journey through a VR experience. First, I'd like to conceptualize what I mean by alienation effect. So Verfremdungseffect in Bertolt Brecht's theory, it involves the use of techniques designed to distance the audience from emotional involvement in the play through jolting reminders of the artificiality of the theatrical performance. By creating stage effects that were strange or unusual, Brecht intended to assign the audience an active role in the production by forcing them to ask questions about the artificial environment and how each individual element related to real-life events. In doing so, it was hoped that viewers would distance themselves emotionally from problems that demanded intellectual solutions. So here it's important to kind of set this in the context of virtual reality, and I'm taking the alienation effect rather from Brecht in a theatrical sense than from the film sense, because I'm also concerned with mixed reality spaces, and the VR piece that I'm presenting here is room scale. So for me, the theatrical aspect is pretty strong. Also, you know, Brecht talks about epic theater and which is basically political, and this is how he makes things political. And so basically implementing this kind of alienation effect in virtual reality pieces creates political layer of VR. So and I'm calling it so-called factual level, or you can call it even a documentary level. On the other side of the spectrum is the suspension of disbelief, which I'm conceptualizing from Aristotle's Poetics. So it is natural for all to delight in works of imitation. The truth is shown by experience, though the object themselves may be painful to see. We delight to view the most realistic representations of them in art. This paradox, the paradox of tragedy, says, so the first quote is actually from a translation by Halliwell from Aristotle's Poetics, and then Worth explains this paradox as the paradox of tragedy, which prompts us to ask whether the audience's pity and fear can be the same as those emotions would be when aroused in ordinary reality-based contexts. A problem related to the paradox of tragedy is that we find pleasure in experiences presented through mimesis that would disturb and upset us were they to happen in reality. And this is again kind of in between, like, where is virtual reality? There's a certain presence, there's experience, but there's also certain mimesis. So depending whether things are happening to us in virtual reality, or depending whether we see others happening happening things to them, that kind of also distinguishes our experience of it. I will come back to suspension of disbelief, but first I would like to also theorize my theoretical framework within my work and within the Symphony of Noise VR that I'm presenting here. I use David Bates' concept of trauma of reason as a starting point of my work, and opacity and non-transparency of technologies through abstraction. Anna Munster says, computational brings to our cultural, aesthetic, and corporeal engagements with technology a mutable and conditional measure of abstraction. Yet the very mutability of data, the infinitely reconfigurable arrangements of code as varying responses to user interaction and as a result of non-human interactions, networked communication with other machines, infrastructure, and technologies, means that the abstract elements of computation are constantly subjected to external transformation and rearrangement beyond their programmed parameters. I look at the error through Bates' lens to question what we consider as error in artificial intelligence and datafication, as there is until now no normative guide. Moreover, Louisa Moore proposes a similar approach in her Cloud Ethics. She says, quote, ethical politics of algorithms involves investigations of how they learn to recognize and to act, how they extract assumptions from data relations, and how they learn what ought to be from relations with other humans and algorithms. She proposes, instead of an episteme of accountability and transparency, the episteme of the opacity, partiality, and illegibility of all forms of giving an account, human and algorithmic. And this is the opacity, the partiality, and the illegibility. This is the part that is kind of the starting point of my work as well. So in order to make software, artificial intelligence, and technology visible or essential in my work, I let the technology fail. And also I let users' agency fail on purpose. Only then we can learn the borders of the given technology and our limited control of it. And that's my claim. Practically, I do this through balancing between suspension of disbelief and alienation effects, which compose the emotional scale and experiential design of each piece. Now I'm going more into the immersion of XR and interaction with software in virtual reality, and how I design the experience. So going back to Aristotle, I used the hero's journey as a map for the user journey. Not all of it, but for some, but some of it, and I will show this to you shortly. Also, I balance between suspension of disbelief and alienation effects, which means also I balance between user's agency and chaos of the software. So emotional scale and effect is basically a combination of suspension of disbelief and alienation effects throughout the experience. And also I wanted just to mention that for experiencing violence in first-person POV can be traumatic, and the alienation effects usually help with distancing ourselves in the virtual reality space. So, and what are the tools, or what are the how can we make this visible, or how can we immerse the user or alienate the user in VR? So some of the tools that I use of suspension of disbelief is, for instance, embodiment. So having a body in a room scale VR makes users want to grab things, walk, or like if they know that somebody's listening, or they can interact through voice, then they use their voice. Also, it's the other characters. When the characters in first person POV talk to the user wants to interact with them. Also, the personalization aspect. is very important, which is user is the main character of the experience, and they are at the center of the narrative. For instance, through looking or gaze, through live personal datification, and this is the personalization tool that we use in Symphony of Noise. And another suspension of disbelief is to give user tool of suspension of disbelief is to give the user the agency to act. So due to their actions, things will change. The other side of the spectrum, on the other side of the spectrum are the alienation effect tools. So these are like similarly what we know from the Brechtian theater as well as from film theory. These are titles, credits, informative voiceover. But then I look at also the VR, and for me, for instance, 2D formats in 3D environments can cause distancing. Graphics such as exit buttons, warning buttons, or directions, turn left, turn right, etc. Characters acting out of their ordinary role. Temporal and scaling aspects of VR. So changes in time and scale that change within VR very, very quickly, that cause also sometimes the nausea. I found them that they are distancing us from, that we are not in the reality we think we are. And for instance, I work with unrealistic or purposefully deformed deepfakes and avatars, and the disembodiment. So Symphony of Noise, I try to be shorter if I can. Symphony of Noise is a sonic VR experience. It was created by me and Jamie Baliou, and it's a piece for HTC Vive, Oculus Rift S, and Valve. Currently it's being shown at Fiverr's VR festival in Canada, which is taking place online. So if you're interested and you have a headset, you can gladly go to the webpage and download it. So how do we, one of the most important parts of how to immerse people in VR is the onboarding and offboarding part. What you see in the picture is our exhibition at Reeperbahn Music Festival in Hamburg in Germany, where we had a ship container, and the ship container was black, and on it there were excerpts from Matthew Herbert's book The Musique, which served also as an inspiration for the piece, and which served also basically for the dramaturgy of the piece as well, and how we made the piece regarding the combination of sound. Once you enter the space, you are in the onboarding/offboarding space, where you can see, where you can read excerpts from the music. You can also sit down and have a look into the book and read more from the book. And actually, on the left side of the space that you can see now, there's actually an excerpt from the documentary about Matthew Herbert that the same production company created. Once you enter the space, you will be welcomed by a facilitator who will introduce you to the headset, and also because it's a room scale experience, they will take care of you. So now I will maybe start, I will show you the first maybe 1 minute of the piece, just to see what we are working with. So press space key to start, and then you see the credits of Symphony of Noise. That's part of the alienation, right? So we're still not at the beginning of immersion. We hear the heartbeat, and then there's a monologue.
All this happens during your experience. Every sound is possible. An in-breath of someone you love towards the end of their life. An out-breath of that person you love. Then an in-breath. The silence of a baby just before it starts breathing again after a seemingly endless pause. An out-breath. The silence of a painter just before the brush touches the paper. An in-breath. The silence before a long-desired kiss. An out-breath.
So each space is introduced on its own as an onboarding aspect of the experience that helps the user to immerse themselves. Then objects start to appear and one can interact with them, for instance, by blowing into them and creating the bass, which is one of the parts of the composition. The more one breathes in, there are other. Oh, I can hear myself. There are other objects that one can trigger. I will probably skip just so that you see how one can trigger them. And these are bodily sounds. Then there's a nature space. One can.
Michaela, can
Yes?
you lower the sound because it's quite loud and we can't hear you speak
Okay.
over the.
Great.
Thank you.
Whoop. So there's another in the next space. One can, for instance, sink into the cave and create kind of nature-like sounds. Yeah, I will skip the walkthrough. So in the last part of my presentation, I would like to basically talk about the piece from this experiential design perspective. So in the world one, so the rhythm and dramaturgy of the experience is basically the rhythm between suspension of disbelief and immersion and alienation aspects. So as you saw at the beginning, you have onboarding, which is immersion outside VR. Then there's titles, which are more alienation aspect of the VR. Then the heartbeat and voiceover introduce you and immerse you into the space again. In world one, personalization is reached through sound activation, through controllers, and through breathing. That's the part where, you know, the more personalized the experience is, the more immersive and the more we believe in suspension of disbelief. Alienation effect is distortion of breath into the bass wobble that you could maybe hear. In world two, personalization is the voice activation, so the singing you could hear. The alienation effect is the voice distortion through the algorithm. So once you sink into that cave, you lose control over your voice. Your voice is taken through an algorithmic, through an algorithm and kind of reconfigured and recorded. In world three, the personalization is activating sounds through controllers as drumsticks, as you can see on the right side. And in world four, it's and the alienation effect is the beat is taken over by an algorithm. So even though you beat in a rhythm, the rhythm changes based on your beat, but it's not anymore yours. It's co-created together with the software. In world four, in the final world, all sounds come together. And the personalization is controllers can turn rings slower and faster. You can add sounds and all sounds come together if all rings are activated. The alienation effect is user loses control once the rings start spinning on their own speed in one direction. And at the end, there is an explosion, voiceover, heartbeat, and credits. this is just to show, I wanted to come to, but I don't have time anymore. So it's just to show that how we design the user journey and emotional scale based on the hero's journey. So you can see just here, there's world 1 and world 2, and there's the threshold and Rubicon, where you basically you go from this inner body world where you are maybe born, maybe not, but it's your, like, the inside, and you then grow up and maybe go through, and then you start learning in the nature space that you can, you know, sing, and you can move within that space. And at some point the transformation comes when all the sounds come together and you can be the conductor of your world. But of course, the cathartic element of the piece is that you lose the control and you blow up, or you blow up, the space blows up. And this is how we basically combine the last space, where you could turn the rings. So this was the water inside the inner space, this was the nature space, this was the supermarket space, and this was the ice outside world, universe space, nature space, sorry. Yeah, that's it. This is my team. Thank you.